Let's talk about the doctrine of Incarnation, which, as you can imagine, some people find intimidating and complicated. But really, it comes down to a very simple claim. And if you want that claim at its most crisp, it's this: Jesus is Lord. What Christians mean when we say Jesus is Lord implies a doctrine of incarnation. Because what we mean when we say Jesus is Lord is that the Son of David, according to the flesh, and the Son of Mary is the Son of God, the Son of the Father, the God of Israel. The Son of Mary is the God of Israel. Now, those two terms I've taken them straight out of Romans 1. This is how Paul describes Jesus at the very beginning of the letter to the Romans. But it's found all over. And if you want to unpack that claim just a little bit, that the Son of Mary is the God of Israel, it comes down to three claims, implicit or explicit. First, Jesus is fully human. He's a human being. He's one of us, like us in every way. Secondly, Jesus is fully divine. Jesus is the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The God who created and redeems and perfects, etc. And third, just in case people get tripped up by the first two, we're talking about the same Jesus. We're talking about one person here. Not two halves, not two persons, not two parts, okay? Jesus is one person. That one person is both fully divine and fully human. We'll both look at the claims themselves, and we'll spend time looking at movements or people or even churches that have tried to work this out in ways the church has found inadequate and so has rejected as heretical. We'll look at Christological heresies. What is a Christological heresy? A Christological heresy is a school of thought that the church has rejected because it either represents an inference or implies inferences that compromise one or more of those three affirmations I just gave you. A Christological heresy compromises Jesus' full humanity or his full divinity or his one personhood, his unity of personhood. That doesn't mean that the people who originated or taught those heresies are, nasty people or that they hate God. They were trying to work out what it means that Jesus is Lord. And for whatever reason, their logic led them into a place that compromises the good news because it distorts Jesus into another figure who he's not. All right? So don't think of heretics as bad people. Think of them as confused about what the gospel really means, often by their own efforts to get it right. So let's look at these claims. We have a few minutes. Let's look at Jesus' humanity. There's not a lot on Jesus' humanity in the New Testament unless you just count basically everything people say about him. The Gospels are biographies. The church used a Greco-Roman literary form called the bios, or the life story, to tell the story of Jesus. You would only choose the biography if you understood Jesus as having the kind of life that you can capture with a biography, right? They get that he's human. I mean, they've hung out with him for years. It doesn't occur to them that he's not human. And so there's not a lot of extended argumentation that Jesus is a human being. There are a few places where it looks like the writer wants to remind the audience that Jesus is human, but ordinarily the claim is taken for granted. On the other hand, there are places where biblical texts draw conclusions or implications from Jesus' humanity. And those get more interesting than just the statement, he's a human being. What does it mean that he's a human being? Well, let me give you three in the time we have left. First, Romans 5, where Paul is, all through Romans, Paul is trying to substantiate the argument that he lays out in Romans 1. The thesis of Paul's letter to the Romans is right there in chapter 1, the way it normally is in the New Testament. Chapter 1 tells you what the rest is going to be about. He puts it in verse 16 and 17. For I am not ashamed of the gospel. The gospel, is the power of God for salvation to everyone who has faith, everyone who believes, to the Jew first and then the Greek. He's substantiating that argument all through Romans, that the gospel is the power of God to salvation for all who believe. And one of the places he goes to do this in Romans 5 is to compare Jesus to Adam. One of the premises of his argument is death came into the world through humanity and spread to all humanity. Some particular failure in the past brought a catastrophic infection of sin to all of us. As one human's trespass led to condemnation for all humans, so one man's act of righteousness leads to acquittal and life for all humans. As by one human's disobedience many were made sinners, so by one human's obedience many will be made righteous. What Paul's doing here is saying sin had a particular beginning, but it became universal in scope. Righteousness has a particular beginning in Jesus Christ. And that has led to availability of acquittal and life for all. The human story is the story of a trajectory of sin, but the human story in Jesus is now the story of a trajectory of righteousness and life. There's a kind of parallelism in the two acts. The one human brought death. This one human brings life. The one human brought condemnation. This human brings acquittal. That one human brought it to all of us. This one brings it to all of us. It's for all of us. This works because Jesus is human, right? It wouldn't work if he were an angel. It wouldn't work if he were a frog. He's got to be human. Because we're talking about the human story. We're talking about where sin and righteousness come from. And here is where they come to creation. All right? Over in 1 Corinthians 15 is another place where Paul treats Jesus' humanity as significant. He's talking to a church that's hung up because it's coming from a culture that thinks of the soul as immortal, like intrinsically immortal, and the body as inferior and bad. And so in the Greco-Roman Platonistic world, people want their souls to be freed from their bodies so that they can live forever in a better way. There was an old Greek expression, soma sema, the body is a tomb, and we can't wait for our souls to be released from our bodies. Because that's the cultural background of the church in Corinth and the greater Roman world, when apostles come around and start preaching the resurrection, they're like, yuck. No thanks, I don't want to be in Michael Jackson's Thriller video. I don't want to be a reanimated corpse. I don't want to be a zombie. So Paul has to help the church understand that that's not the story of humanity. Christ has, in fact, been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. For as by a human being came death, by a human has come also the resurrection of the dead. This is pivotal for him. As in Adam all die, so in Christ all will be made alive. Paul is arguing that Jesus' resurrection is paradigmatic for humanity. It is Jesus' life story, life, death, resurrection, is the template of all human life. That's how Paul can say that he is the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. What are first fruits? Anybody know? Anybody come from an agricultural family? First fruits are the earliest ripening crop of the season. Let me show you, because my mom has a fig tree in her garden. And I'm a fan. And they're just coming ripe at this time of year. Late August, early September is when you first start getting figs. But some years, way out in June or July, there's one or maybe two early ripening fig. It's a total tease because then you get to taste it and then you have to wait another couple months. Those are the first fruits. I mean, Israel is commanded to sacrifice its first fruits to God. So here's a picture of my mom's fig tree. And you see all the green figs? There's one there, there's one, there's one. They're actually all over. There's one, there's one. Now look at this guy. That's Jesus, according to 1 Corinthians 15. All right? He's the first fruits. He's the one who first has gone through what we are supposed to go through. Moving down to verse 47 as he keeps working with this. The first human was from the earth, a human of dust. The second human is from heaven. I keep using the word human because the Greek word he's using is gender inclusive. It's the word anthropos. There are exclusive words for man and woman in Greek, aner and gene. But the Greek word for humanity is anthropos. That's why anthropology is the study of all people, not just guys. As was the human of dust, so are those who are of the dust. And as is the human of heaven, so are those who are of heaven. And now, listen to this. This is good news that most of you apparently have yet to hear. Just as we have borne the image of the human of dust, we shall also bear the image of the human of heaven. Jesus' resurrection is our future. All right, we're the green figs. In him, we can become the ripe purple figs. But that first you have to be planted and only then rise. This doesn't work if Jesus is no longer human. All right? To the 75% of you who don't think Jesus is still human, I have good news. He is. And so his story will be our story, and his resurrection will be our resurrection. And one last thought, since it's 10:20. In Hebrews 2, we have this great high priest who intercedes for us, because he's a human. He's one of us. Jesus couldn't still intercede as one of us if he were no longer human. His humanity, his eternal humanity, is fundamental to his priesthood, which isn't just past priesthood, it's present.